Hello again and very welcome to the chapter about defensive exchanges. This is a very useful method within defensive play because unlike some other methods like mobilization that we just looked at, defensive exchanges, they have a very fast impact on the battle in the sense that if you're, for example, able to trade off the opponent's attacking queen, you can immediately have benefits from this operation because their menacing queen leaves the board and your king is feeling much safer. Oppositely, for example, mobilization, you need some time to bring in that piece to the battle. And there will still be a fight. You have to use the piece properly and so on. But if you trade off one of the opponent's most important attacking pieces, safe to say your defensive task will be a little simpler. So I wanted to check some different cases where different pieces are being traded off among the opponent's pieces. And you can also remember that in the chapter number 18, I think in Attacking Methods 1, we saw actually the attacker carrying out this idea. They can also trade off an opponent's piece, but for attacking purposes. They trade off, for example, our defending knight on f6 or the fianchetto bishop on g7. So it's the same kind of thinking. We have to identify which are the most active pieces, most important pieces at a specific point of the battle. And that's what defensive exchanges, that's what it's also about, trading off the most important enemy piece at a specific moment. So let's get started. Let's have a look at our first example. I won't tell you about exactly which opponent's piece that we would like to trade off, because I'm convinced that you will notice yourself. Of course, we're playing here with the black pieces in this game between Rodriguez with white and Obregon playing black. We can see already what's coming up here is that white is playing for an attack. Our king is stuck in the center. Black's king is very exposed on e8. You can see that white just needs one more move to set up a very dangerous threat. They would like to play rook d1, and as you can see, queen d8 would be already difficult for black to meet. Fortunately, black at this point, they can rely on our idea. They can rely on the defensive exchange. I don't think that Obregon thought for a long time about taking the bishop on h5. That would be a bad idea. They are the exchange up. Why on earth should they try to take more material when also their king is in big danger? Yeah, don't take on h5 with the queen or with the pawn. In both cases, white will play rook d1. As you can see, it's very dangerous for black. I think at this point they will have to carry out a defensive sacrifice instead, but that was not the point, and white will still have attacking chances thanks to black's numerous weaknesses on the dark square. So in the game, of course, by now you already saw the move, you knew already what was going on, and so did Obregon. He played here the move queen d5. Very effective, very strong. In this way, we're able to kick away white's queen from the attack. They will have to trade it off, else the attack won't really be working because the queen is leaving its optimal place in the center. So in the game, white didn't take, they let black take instead. They played a tricky move, bishop f3. This was the last chance to go wrong, you could say. Of course, we shouldn't take like that. Then it would be the same thing again. White will play rook d1, and again we have the threat of queen d8. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to castle here, obviously. And we have some problems with development. If we speak about what I was saying in the introduction here, the relative value of the pieces, you can definitely see here that these pieces are not, they're not playing, right? Black is having so many passive pieces, so it's no wonder that white's attack breaks through here. He's simply much more active. So after bishop f3, black hurried to trade on d6, and after bishop takes d6, as you can see, the worst is already over here for black. But still, of course, we would like to get the maximal out of this position. You can see that white's about to take on b7. We don't want to take back due to bishop takes c6. So we have to do something about this tension among the on the queen side. So that's what Obregon did here. He played a very precise move. He played at this point rook a6. What's the point of this? Well, we're now into concrete tactical issues. What white is trying to do, they're trying to get back the piece, which will lead to two bishops versus a rook. Black will do anything possible to avoid that. So in the first place, what black would like to do is that if white takes on b7, they would like to take back and then take the bishop on d6. While if white tries to save this bishop first, well, then also black will try to use some counter threats in order to somehow attack white's bishop before white can cash in on the queen side, something like that. So actually that's what happened in the game. They played here bishop e5, as we were establishing here. If c takes b7, we will take back on b7. As you can see, this would be, white could play this move, trying to get to an opposite color bishop's endgame. But as you can see in this case, we take on f3 and we can take on a2. Maybe if rooks were off, there would be chances for a draw, but not with rooks on and black's rook being more active. So that's difficult for white to save that position. So after rook a6 in the game, Rodriguez played bishop e5 immediately, and here, as you can see, we have the situation. We're talking about intermediate moves in the defense. We have two threats here to be worried about. Bishop takes rook and c takes b7. So if we castle away, they will take on b7. So for that reason, we should use this little clever tactic f6 intermediate threat, so that after bishop takes f6, we can attack this rook in the game. They played rook f8. It was also possible to castle. Both moves have the same point. I guess they prefer this because they want to have the king a little closer maybe later on in the game. C takes b7, bishop takes b7, bishop takes b7, and of course you can guess black's next move here. That's right, we want to save that extra exchange, you would say, or extra piece. So yeah, don't put the rook here, I was going to say, because then you have bishop c6, so we should put the rook there instead. That's how the game went. White can try to keep material balance, but it won't work if you play bishop g7 again. Rook f7, we have a situation where both white's bishop are attacked. So in the game, white had to play bishop e5 and black just took back, and later on they managed to win this game thanks to their extra exchange. So simple example about when we really need to use this method of defensive exchanges. We badly need to trade off white's menacing queen before things get really serious here after rook d1 next, and even move like c7 could come up in some variation if black tries to control this square. So very nice, effective move, queen d5. You don't need to think of it for a long time. It's something that you can play almost automatically, this kind of move. Very quickly try to get rid of that queen. So let's have a look at one more example on this topic. In our next example, I would say it's much more tricky, mainly because we have a wider choice in this case. In this example, with white pieces Alonso and playing black is Gukesh. You can see that it's a tricky position. There are hanging pieces and so on. What happened here is that Gukesh just played this move, bishop e7 to g5. Very nice move, very brave move, you could say, tactically brave. What Gukesh has noticed here in the first place is that white's a little weak on the second rank. So specifically the pawn on f2 is weak here. What black is trying to do is to trade off this bishop so that the queen could go there. And at the same time you can see, of course, also the white rook is hanging. So it's a tricky position here for white. And we should maybe look very quickly in a tactical context what happens here if we just accept the sacrifice, because the rook is hanging. So you could almost do this without moving the pieces. You could say queen takes d7. If they play queen takes d7, white, if we play it, they will take on e3. As you can see now, if we move the rook, then they can probably take again on f2. This would be very dangerous for us. If we instead, after queen takes d7, if we take back on e3, obviously they will take on c1. That's very bad for us, because as you can see, then the bishop is hanging, and okay, it can go back, but then for starters, black could take on e3 at that point, right? So seems that it's very dangerous to take on d7. All right, we put some effort in this, so let's move the pieces quickly. Bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, bishop takes e3. This is difficult for white, as we were saying, because we have this threat, against the rook, after which also the bishop might be in the air, and rook f1, black will take on f2. I think both captures are interesting, but this one is faster. Yeah, definitely, because you have a check here, you have something over there also. Yeah, it seems like white is getting almost mated in this variation, so this would be avoided. Another thing you could do, of course, you could take on g5, because in that case, if you take on g5, later on you could try to take on d7, perhaps. That would be a way to play also, but there is a problem with this, and this actually happened in the game. He took on g5 in the game. Yeah, what was white's thought here if black just took back? Maybe then he was about to take on d7. I don't see it completely clearly, but never mind. It's not really relevant, because black has a much nicer move here. Black played queen takes f2. Well, that one is easy to see, of course, but after king h1, I think this is the position where the players evaluated the consequences in a different way, because white was probably saying that they can survive this attack. Knight g3 is just a check, they can go king h2, and then the rook is hanging on d7. Maybe if rook d2, he must have prepared something. Yeah, the bishop is there, sorry. I need to drink some more coffee. But there is a move that Gukers noticed from afar. Aha, these are the difficult moves in the tactical battle, the silent moves, quiet moves, which don't threaten something at once. You got it. Black played here rook d4. This was a difficult move to see. But Gukers must have observed that white's bishop is sort of a good square. There is a tactic with rook d2 coming up if the bishop leaves this diagonal. Also, you can spot another tactical idea, something with like rook takes e4, rook takes e4, queen f1, and take on c4. So this is what Alonso possibly missed in the game. And unfortunately, he couldn't save this position. He tried in the game bishop h4, trying to give back material. But after queen takes h4, queen e7 check, e8 check, king h7, queen takes f7, black played knight f2 check, king g1, and knight takes h3. You can see the tactic here involved. Something like that I was going to say, but actually the game didn't go like that. It went like this instead, because actually black is about to mate white. Yeah, white is very unfortunate that they cannot give more checks. This pawn is a real hero, you could say, in black's battle. It stops all the checks. So nice display here by Gukers. He took his chances, bishop g5. It's not a winning move, as we will see next, but it's giving him some practical chances. The opponent could go wrong in the complications. That's exactly what happened here. Bishop takes, queen takes, and there was this very nice move, rook d4. Yeah, nice little tactical intermezzo, we would call it. Simply too many things for white to handle at the same time. So there was a simple solution here, and since you know which is the chapter involved, you can easily figure out what white should have played instead. That's true. In this position, white has some long-term trumps also. They have this nice queenside pawn majority that would like to advance at some later stage once the attack has been dealt with. And for that reason also, we should go for a little safer approach here. Queen c2, that's a very good move here. Queen c2, you can see that we're trading the queens because we are in effect also, apart from defending the pawn, we're also hitting the knight on e4. So it's almost impossible for black to keep the material on the board, I was going to say, but I'm actually wrong. They can do that. They can play here queen e5. So this is possible. This is probably what they should play. They could also take the queen, but in that case, rook takes, and we get the kind of situation that we're talking about. White is happy to have that queenside pawn majority. We should always have some respect for that majority, but it's true that black also has some activity with the open file. So black is probably okay here. I guess they would take sooner or later on e3, maybe give the check first, or maybe take, yeah, let's say the check first, so that white's king has to go this way and we take. You get this kind of position. If white can keep this the way it is, they will be better. But I can see here in my notes that king f8 is a good idea, bringing the king a little closer, and later on if white tries to soften up the queen side, you can take and then play rook b1, something like that, I think. Rook b1, and if a3, maybe rook b3. So black is definitely fighting back here. Most probable result is a draw at this moment of the battle. So queen c2, very good move. Black, if they trade queens, white is outside, no danger anymore, and also they can push a little, but they can press in this endgame with a queenside pawn majority. By the way, queen c2, why not queen b3, you might ask? There are always possibilities to compare moves, right? Moves with similar functions like queen c2 and queen b3. Almost always there is some kind of difference. Here the difference would be that if queen b3, we're not attacking the knight, which means that black could actually retreat the queen to f6, which means extra pressure at f2. This might not make a big difference, but of course, if we can avoid it, much better. So queen c2, black could then try to keep the queens on, something like that, queen e5. And we can play in different ways here. What I thought was simple was to just take on g5, bishop takes, queen takes, and then put the rook on e1 so that we hit the knight. Yeah, you could see that we couldn't take the knight right now because the rook was hanging, so we play first rook e1, and after knight f6, now we can play rook d1. This is the move that we wanted to play because we want to take control of the open file. So it would be basically, I would say, maybe slightly better for white, but also fightable for black, this position. But anyway, this is not really that important how big is white's advantage, or if it is an advantage. It's more about the fact that we managed to avoid the attack. That was the key priority here. They were attacking us, and we're very happy that we were able to bring back the queen in this way. Queen c2, defensive exchange. we're offering the exchange. Unlike the previous example, this time we couldn't force the exchange. They could escape the exchange by playing queen e5, but in that case we have managed to bring the queen a little closer to the battle, and we have avoided black's big threat. So nice move, queen c2, something to remember, simple but very effectful. Okay, not every time we trade off the queens, we shouldn't think that that will always be a relief for us. I wanted to show you an example also where it's the opposite. There are no absolute rules, there are always exceptions, and here you have one exception, because in this game between with the white pieces Tabatabaei and playing black Jufa, you can see that white is attacking their pawn down, but they have a very nice initiative. They are hitting the pawn on f6. You can see that rook c8 is in the air and so on. What Jufa probably considered was that he's under an attack. It would be nice to trade queens and get into a safer position, but this was actually wrong on this occasion. He played here the move queen f7. You can see that also, apart from offering the trade, also the queen would like to go to h5 with some attacking possibilities on this side, but white at this point, they accepted the trade. Queen takes, rook takes. Now they got back a pawn by rook takes e5. You can see the situation here with the tension on the 6th rank. After f takes e5, rook takes h6. White was better in this endgame. They later on brought the rook to e6. You can see that this situation, that should not be forgotten. When you have an advanced rook pawn, for example, it could be any pawn, but very often it's the rook pawn, like the a6 or the h6 pawn. In the endgame, this can be very, very useful. The space that you have gained, it could be in a pawn endgame where your king, like it gets first in some past pawn's race when the opponent's king is going on this side, and your pawn is able to queen sooner. But it could also be that you have fixed the weakness on a7 in this case. So the move, I think they played rook c7 and white played rook e6. But you can see here that beyond the fact that both sides are taking pawns, also white has some idea like bring the rook to attack this pawn. So this is something very useful in the positional context, you could say, advancing the rook pawns up to h6. We had that in some example also, I think in this game with Arjan with white pieces in the chapter 18 about attacking methods. We saw an example like that where he had a pawn with white on h6 and he traded off an opponent's bishop on g5. So that's something to remember. I think we have one example here in this chapter also. Later on we will come back to this situation, but it will actually be black who will have a pawn on a3. But all right, we will talk about that later. So here you can see white is pressing, white is having an advantage in this endgame, and they later on prevail. You can see that if they take this pawn, automatically they have a passed pawn, and they could perhaps even set up a pair of connected passed pawns, which would be really bad news for black. So queen f7, it was not the best choice, but then you will say, what to do? How could we possibly cook up some counterplay here? How can we defend against white's strong pressure? And the answer lies in white's king. And unexpectedly, white's king can be attacked in a way that I think perhaps we wouldn't notice at first sight. But now you have the hint. So what do you think? Which pieces should take part in this attack? How should it be arranged, do you think, with the black pieces here? Definitely that's a difficult move to see. You got it. G4. What does this move mean? Well, it means that we can go rook h2, and after king takes h2, we'll play queen h6, and if the king goes back, we have the check on h3, while if the king instead goes to g1, well, they will taste rook d1, and we have mating ideas again with this move, queen h1 in the end. So this was a very nice move, g4. We're not like pulling a trick here, it's simply an effective move. It's a useful move also, even strategically speaking. It's good for us to fix the pawns like that. So actually white needs to be careful here in this position. White should they should take the moment now to trade off a piece. You could say it's even an attacking piece. Perhaps in the neutral position you wouldn't think that this rook is an attacking piece, but it is now, because we have rook h2 coming up. Just as an example, now if you play queen e6, which would be the most tempting move for white, perhaps you can see that this backfires completely. Black will play rook h2 check. And when I looked at this, I thought actually black was winning, but they're not winning, because in typical computer fashion here, you can save this by heroic defense. You could say, yeah, don't take definitely. Then indeed black is winning. We can just play out this for the sake of clarity. This is what black is playing for, right? Something like that. So After rook h2, they would in first place have to decline the sacrifice. They have to play king f1, and after rook h1 check, king e2. Black has two ways in which they could try to produce mate, but let's look at the most obvious one. If you play here rook dd1, so that you're trying to play rook e1. Again, if you look at this, you would think that black is winning, but okay, the computer is very strong in these positions. f3, it's saying making space for the king. We're back in chapter 9, I think. King f2 can come next, and white saves their skin. But as you can see, complex variation and not something that white really wants to do. So after the strong move g4, white's safest choice here, rook c8, trading off this rook so that it cannot participate in the counterattack. So here black would have to be a little more pragmatic and simply play for defense again. Rook d8 first, and after rook takes, queen takes, white could still try to enter with the queen. Queen f7 looks very impressive. We're touching the pawn on h7. So you remember the chapter about smart defense? How do you think we could defend that pawn in a smart way, in an indirect way, the pawn on a7? That's completely right. We can't defend it in a mechanical way, because in that case we will have problems with the center, with the pawn on f6. So you got it. We should play here the clever move rook g6. So they cannot take it, unfortunately. Then their queen is trapped. They'll have to play something else in this position. Rook h5 is one option. Then we can go back with the rook, and we are still surviving in this position. If they play something else, like just some random move, let's say c4, I think actually what black will do, they will just wait. There are positions like that, where you just wait, like passive defense. We saw one example in the chapter about heroic defense, if you remember the difficult endgame, the last one, the Obgols with white, Bocharov. If you remember, white played rook e7, they waited with the rook on e7. Anyway, yeah, you can check that later. So black would wait here, and it's not so easy for white to progress. The rook is actually not that active on f5 after all. If you go for the pawn now, we cannot trap the queen, but what do you think black would play? Aha, I don't need to ask it twice. Queen d1, of course, and as you can see, again, mating threats coming up, so it's white now who has to find some way to save their skin, some sacrifice to some check, and I'm not really sure, but okay, safe to say it's white who is under pressure here in this position already. So nice. What we have seen here in this example is that black's under pressure. It appears as if they should try to trade queens to make life easier, like in the previous examples. There you can see how difficult chess is. In the previous two examples, trading queens was basically the only way out, and here it's quite the opposite. We should not play queen f7. That's almost losing, because we end up in this difficult endgame after rook takes e5, thanks to white's numerous advantages here, among which we have the far advanced a-pawn. It was better for black to go for their counterattack by playing the clever move g4, setting up this idea with rook h2. In this case, they are able to put up more resistance. This time, it was not correct to trade queens, despite the fact that we were under an attack. Okay, we should have a look at some other pieces which can be traded off. Let's talk a little about the minor pieces in our next example. Is the Sicilian battle. You can see that white, at some point they played f4, they open up the f-file, they have all their pieces very neatly placed on the king side. They are waiting to attack us here. One plan for white would be something like bishop f4 to protect his pawn, put the queen on g4, and then I think at that point they would already be threatening something like bishop h6. Some rook lifts might come up also. There are other plans, an e6 break. The queen can sometimes go to h5 and hit the pawn on h7, things like that. So not so simple for black, this position. Not simple at all. There are some ways in which we can go wrong. But before we continue with this game, by the way, Koro with white and Diamant playing black, is there any particular white piece that you would like to trade off? If you look at all white pieces, is there anyone in particular that you think it would be useful for us to get it off the board? Aha, I think so too. One of white's most prominent attacking pieces right here in this structure with the pawn on e5 is this bishop on f5. This is a very strong piece, the bishop on f5. We would love to trade it off. So we could try something like knight c5 and try to play next turn bishop c8. We will basically trap white's bishop in that case. However, white will play here the move queen g4, and as you can see, bishop h6 is coming very quickly. We don't have time now. We lose the exchange, I think, if we play bishop c8. They will play queen. They will play bishop h6, sorry. So if we go king h8, we would renew this plan, but here white can use the provocation idea. If you remember that example, Marjanovic with the white pieces, he started using the queen to soften up black's pawns. Here we are again, queen h3, h3. This is a very clever move because h6 cannot be played, then there is the sacrifice on h6. And if g6, you can see that now black is weak on these squares, right? We can play something like bishop g4, and already there is bishop h6 coming up perhaps, and the pawn is a little shaky on f7. So this is not ideal for black, but the idea in itself is correct. And here we talk a little about flexibility, because if we would love to carry out this bishop trade, we could do it with two different move orders. No, we could play knight c5 immediately, or we could play bishop c8 first. So what do you think is the difference? Which possible benefit is there from playing bishop c8 as to compare with knight c5? That's correct. If you play bishop c8 first, you have the extra, you could say, flexibility merit that you're still touching the pawn on e5, which means that if you play bishop c8 and they try to play it as in the previous variation with queen g4, you can see the difference. Our knight is still on d7, which means that we can safely take on e5. We are not, I mean, it would be normal to think that maybe something like queen g3 and the knight is in danger, but we can also always back it up with f6 if necessary. If they play something like bishop h6, we can always play rook f7. So black would be okay here. I think f6 straight away, or maybe take first, so that you have this like a piece to attack in some tactical context, perhaps a loose piece. So f6 could be played here, and black would be actually perfectly okay in this position. So it's better for that reason to start with bishop c8. Simply, we still don't show our cards. We have these two knight moves available depending on white's play. So that's what Diamant played in the game. He played bishop c8. One thing to notice here also, you don't really need to be afraid of e6. It looks a little scary at first sight, but it's actually nothing serious. You can put the knight on f6, and as you can see, pawn takes, we can just take back, and we have everything defended here. So very nice decision by black. They played here the move bishop c8, getting ready for knight c5, trying to trade off the bishop on f5. White could play something like bishop f4 so that they support the pawn in order to play queen g4 next. And now, of course, there is also the threat of e6, so black's move is evident here, queen b6. I was thinking, by the way, yeah, king h1 and knight c5, and we have managed this plan again. You can see that we managed to trade off the bishop, and we could even consider something like knight e6. This would be just fantastic to put the knight on e6, the perfect square, blockading square. I was thinking, but I'm not sure, but one trick I wanted to show here also. I think that if white goes bishop e3, we could actually trade pieces in an unexpected way. How do you think black could carry out a defensive operation, so to speak, a trading operation? I think so. Maybe it's possible also to take this pawn. That's perfectly possible. But okay, in any case, this is good to know also. Queen takes, and bishop c5. If I'm not missing something, this should also be possible for black. We don't win anything, but we managed to trade off the queens. So anyway, back to the game. Let's see what happened. Bishop c8. In the game, white played knight a4. The knight was not very useful, and I think they were perhaps wanting to prevent this blockading plan after knight c5. Now they get a chance to trade off the knight. But of course, trades in itself, it's favorable for black because they are defending in this position. So bishop takes, knight takes c5, bishop takes c5, check. King h1, we quickly take here on f5, and this way we connect our rooks again, as you can see. White took back with a rook, and black played rook fe8. It was possible to go with the other rook, but I guess Diamant didn't want to venture this pawn on a6, so he played simply here rook fe8. Queen d3 was played in the game. White is, I think, preparing. They simply want to move out of the pin first, but they're preparing something like maybe rook f1 and attack this pawn. But black just played g6. That didn't happen. Rook ff1, and we're actually back to something we saw in the previous chapter in the last example Stefansson's game. If you remember that game where white sacrificed on the king side and started attacking, we talked about the bishop maneuver, and here it is again, and I can assure you that in the next chapter you will also see it. You got it. This is a very useful method, especially if you play Sicilian structures. Bishop f8, the bishop will come to g7, where it will help the king's safety. White played c4, and when they play something like this, it's definitely a signal that they are not playing for an attack anymore. They are now playing in a more positional way, which is, you could say, sign of relief for us. They don't have any attacking possibilities left. So black played queen b7, safe move to safeguard the pawn on d5, c takes d5, c takes d5, bishop c3. Of course, our next move is very evident. Bishop g7, our king is safer than ever. Bishop d4, rook e6. Finally, it was the rook who took up the blockading task. Rook a e8 will come next, and black is at least equal in this position. They have a target on e5 that they can work on. So nice display by Diamant, very precise defense. The idea of trading the bishops, it's not that difficult to spot, but it's important to start with this move and only then knight e5 as for flexibility reasons. And this was a very good trade. That's what I'm trying to say here. From white's minor piece is definitely that bishop. It was the key piece to try to trade off because, yeah, it's simply the most active minor piece in this particular position. Okay, time to have a look at trade of another piece. I think the next example will not be difficult for you. Let's see if we can get this right. White has just played here the move bishop f6. Sorry, bishop f6 like that. White's the pawn down. They played some kind of gambit in the French, I think. And they ended up like this. And you can see that what white is after here. They would like black to take on f6. They will take back with a pawn. And in that case, as you can see, there will be mating possibilities with queen h6. So if we take on f6, we should really be ready for some difficulties here because queen h6 looks extremely scary for black. I looked a little at this. I just wanted to show you one detail. If black wants to prevent the mate on g7 at this occasion, they will badly need to protect that square, cover that square. Not many black pieces can do that. One of them is the knight. They could play something like knight d4 here. And the point is that after knight takes d4, yeah, you can see that if queen h6, we have knight f5, right? So the point is that if white takes on d4, black takes back, and they are hoping to play bishop takes f6 if queen h6. Yeah, that's easy to understand. But white has a very enterprising move here that you could perhaps find in tactics books and so on. So what do you think white should play here? A little connected to secrets thinking, you could say, perhaps. We know that black needs this bishop in the defense. Can you find some fancy move for white? Aha, interesting and very unexpected. White can play this move here, rook c5. And the point is that if you take with the bishop, obviously there is queen h6. On the other hand, if you take with the rook, well, you give me a chance to take on d4, like this, right? So actually here, black will still be under some pressure. A computer will hold this position because it will find the move e5 here to give away a pawn to open up the game a little. Still, yeah, I don't really remember all these variations. What was the big point with e5? Something with maybe the queen can come to protect this pawn or something. Or there must be some other point. Yeah, I think so. Maybe if you take with the knight, I can play like that. And I'm just guessing. Queen f4, maybe you have queen b6. Maybe that's the reason why we needed to get that pawn off the board so we can take. In any case, what white would play here in this funny variation, they will play queen e3. So now they're actually threatening to play queen h6. And we will have to play queen b6, I think, and they will take on c5. So you could enter these kind of crazy variations, which are, by the way, not easy to see at the board. But what Van Vele did in this game, by the way, Tuchaev with white and Van Vele with the black pieces, Van Vele found a much nicer move to avoid all these troubles. He realized that there is actually no reason to take on f6 to help white, but there is another plan that we need to be careful about. Maybe what white could also consider here is to play knight e5 and queen h4. That's a more serious plan. It's much more difficult for us to cope with that plan of mate on h7. So for that reason, we could start thinking in terms of defensive trades. So speaking of defensive trades, which piece would you like to trade off from white's pieces and how could you achieve that? Of course, trading off the queens would be great, but it's difficult to achieve. But what we could do, we could manage to trade off their knight. We can use the motive of a fork to achieve that, exactly. We can play here knight e4. That's what Van Vele noticed in the game. Now knight e2 is coming, so white, they don't have time for knight g5. They will have to accept the trade of the knights. So they played here knight takes, black simply took back. Bishop takes. This time we don't have any tactical issues with rook c5 or anything because we simply didn't commit ourselves on this side. We didn't take yet, but now we're ready to take probably. So this explains white's next move here, bishop e7, and after rook fe8, bishop d6. White's problem is basically that they're a pawn down and they didn't succeed in the attack. Van Vele simply played here the move b4, getting ready to play bishop e5 as well. Black had a big advantage and they went on to win. As simple as that. What happened here was that white had some attacking potential, But an important piece in this attack was the knight on f3, so black hurried to play here knight d4, which means that they badly need to accept our trade because there is the forking motive on e2. And at the same time, you will say, of course, it's good for us to trade pieces because we're also a pawn up. All right, we should continue. Let's have a look at, and you could say, an asymmetrical trade. We saw here the bishop is traded for a bishop. We saw a knight is traded for a knight. But let's have a look at an asymmetric trade in this very interesting Sicilian example, playing with the white pieces, Indian Grandmaster Puranik, and on the other side we have Siddhant. Black has just played knight b6. We can see that it's some kind of Najdorf battle, some open Sicilian, where we have opposite castled kings, so both kings are a bit in danger, you could say. Both sides will try to attack with their pawns. Both sides are actually pushing their pawns towards the opponent's king. But black apparently seems to be faster here. Knight b6, as you can see, the knight is coming to c4, a very nice square for the knight in general in the Sicilian. And this explains what white did in the game. They hurried to trade off that knight. We don't think too much about the bishop in the end game and things like that, good bishop or bad bishop. We are more focusing on the activity of the pieces, and we can see that it's dangerous to allow them to bring the knight to c4, and maybe after that they can start or they can continue to push their queenside pawns. So Puranik quickly traded on b6 and queen takes b6. But his next move, at least to me, I'm not an expert on this Najdorf positions. I was impressed by his next move, but I understand it. Thing is that black is still apparently faster, so white needs to do something on their side. So he played f4. Maybe it's obvious to you, but to me it was a bit contra, what would you say? Paradoxical that you would open the position after giving away the bishop, but this makes perfect sense dynamically speaking, because white is trying to get attacking chances on the king side. So that's what you have to play like this. So you better not play the open Sicilian if you're not happy with, if you're not how would you say, comfortable with this kind of moves. So interesting, we're learning here. E takes f4, white took with the queen. In this way they get ready to put the knight on d4 so that they can move the knight to either f5 or c6. Bishop f6, I will be honest with you, I still feel like black must be better here, but Puranik showed that it's possible to turn the tables here. He started with the move knight d4, it's a very good move to centralize the knight, and black played a4. And at this point he played a very nice move. He played queen d2. So what do you think? What's the motive for this, the motivation for this retreat? The queen goes back. Why is that? That's completely right. It's not just about defense, it's more about attack actually. What he has in mind here is to play rook takes f6. Very nice. Rook takes, pawn takes, and then he will continue his attack with the queen and with the knight and so on. So very pretty way of thinking. Black would love to secure this bishop in some way. If they had g6 in, they would like to play like bishop c7. But here on the other hand, they don't have a good square for the bishop. If bishop e5, that's right, we will play knight c6 and it's a different story. If we're able to eliminate this bishop, the attack is not that dangerous anymore. If they push a pawn on the queen side, we can very often ignore that. Or we could perhaps take and play a3. Sorry, yeah, more likely that's what we're gonna play. And we could take the bishop at our leisure. That would be like a key consideration here. If they take back, we have a pass pawn also. So very nice move, knight c6. So after queen d2 in the game, black instead played bishop g5, winning a tempo, and white put the queen on f2. So this makes sense for two reasons. One, we're targeting a little black's bishop with h4, and two, we are ready to again move the knight. And this would actually help us to produce the other trade that we're looking for, the trade of queens, which will help white on account of their more exposed king. So black played at this point a3. They could have tried b3 again, and it seems that here we should use the little idea that we just came across to take with the c pawn, and after a takes b3 we play a3, and we're hoping that this will save our king. And I think it's not so easy for black to break through anymore. So after queen f2, black played in the game a3 instead, trying to soften up the dark squares, especially the square on c3. They would like to put the queen there at some stage, but white hurried to try to bring about the trade of queens. They played here knight f5. So you can see now the trade of queens is coming up, and also white has some slight pressure on d6. Queen c7 was black's, you could say, desirable move. That's what they would like to play. But I'm convinced that you can see White's next move here, right? We're talking attack and defense, or defense and attack. So this time it's a good moment to go for a counterattack. Aha, we can play here the move Queen D4. What's the point? Well, threat of mating 1, and if Bishop F6, exactly, Knight takes H6. Sicilian players, they don't think twice about this kind of moves, like after King H7, Rook takes F6. This would be White's idea here. D takes, and I think we don't take, although we could probably do that also, but even stronger, Knight F5, so we're already trying to mate them here. So very nice position for White. That Knight is getting just better and better. So that's what White had prepared in the event of Black moving the Queen to C7. They would like to play Queen D4 and continue with the attack. In the game, Black took on F2, and by then you can say White is safe. Now White is completely safe. After Rook takes F2, it's already White who's perhaps pressing a little pressure on this pawn on D6, and also after Rook A6, B3. Now it's White actually who's playing for an advantage. This pawn is becoming a weakness. But I wanted to say also that in this kind of situation, this pawn could be very useful. With other pieces on the board, this could be very useful. And I think I had it here in some of my variations. Yeah, let me go back a little if you don't mind. After the move A3, I was praising this move Knight F5, preparing Queen D4 and also offering the trade of queens. So if we played instead B3, now you will see my point here. Black could play something like Rook AE8. So why would I play Rook AE8? There is a concrete tactical idea, you could say. Now if Knight F5, Black would actually pursue the trade of the minor pieces, because in that case, something with the pawn structure would favor them. So they could play Bishop E3 here. After Knight takes, we could even take here with the Queen, and after Queen takes, Rook takes. This could be interesting for Black, if you see what I mean. This is now very, very useful, similar to the example we had before, Tabatabai Yufa, no? The one where Black traded queens and they shouldn't, and White had some ideas on the queen side with the pawn on A6 and Black had a pawn on A7. Here it's the same situation, you could say. Black would have counterplay here in this position. This is very nice for them in the long run. White is even having like a back rank problem. The Rook could come here and maybe you could, I don't know, attack this pawn or maybe double up or something like that. So that's also important. In the game instead, after A3, he played Knight F5, and you can see that after Queen takes, Rook A6, B3, you reach the same kind of pawn structure, but this time it's like different, because White's Knight is probably more useful than Black's bishop here. The bishop on G5, it's not exactly clear which are its, what would you say, its possibilities here. But the White Knight can do plenty of things, no? We could try to bring it to maybe to C4 or to C6 and attack Black's pawns and so on. So anyway, that's what I wanted to mention about this far advanced pawns on the queen side. This is how the game went. After B3, Rook E8, H4, Bishop D8, Rook F4. White was having the advantage, or at least some pressure on Black. The pawn is attacked, and also there is some plan with evading with the rook like this or like that, I think. So nice play by Puranik. He was under some pressure, I would say, here at the very beginning, but it was very important to take this bishop on, this knight on B6, and then quickly open up the game with F4. We should not let them plant a knight on C4. Very important move, bishop takes B6. All right, let's have a look at another, you could say, Sicilian structure, but it's a different variation. Our next example, it's from the Sicilian Alapin, but it can also arise in other openings. So basically what we have here, it's the kind of position that the great Yevgeny Sveshnikov, he was a specialist in these lines. He was one of the first players to understand the potential of the Alapin variation with White. He would love to get into these kind of positions and score very well in them. So basically White has accepted a slightly worse pawn structure. You can see that the pawn on C3 is a little exposed, no? And here also like a relative weakness. In the end game, this could be a problem, but White is playing for an attack here. You can see that what White would like to do here, basically following the steps of Sveshnikov, something like Queen F4, Knight G5, attack this pawn. But they can also go, sometimes they can go with the Queen to H4 if the bishop is not down. Another typical plan, H4, H5, would Sveshnikov also use and put the Queen on, let's say, G4 and try to take and just break through with bishop takes G6 in the end. So White has definite potential here, but White needs to keep plenty of pieces on the board here. For example, the trade of queens would be fantastic for Black. That would lead to a very nice endgame for Black, but White won't cooperate. So We won't be able to achieve that with black, but what we could do, we could try to trade off some minor pieces. And I would like to ask you, what do you think about these three minor pieces, the bishop, the knight, and the other bishop? Which do you think is the most powerful? Which comes next, and which do you think is the least powerful in this position, in this structure, sorry, in this pawn structure? I think so too. The most powerful, perhaps, it could be this bishop, but especially this knight is also very strong. On some occasions, we can use it to. There are even ideas like bring the knight like this to enter there, but you can also sometimes put it on e5 and so on. But probably the least active piece for white is this bishop, supposedly a good bishop, but not so powerful in this structure. I have an example like that in Mastering Chess Strategy, by the way, with the black piece is Korneev. We talked about active exchanges, I remember, on that occasion. So here is basically the same thing. Black would like to trade off the bishop and the knight. These are more dangerous pieces, and we were just talking about this fact that they can be included in an attack on the black king side. And in this game between Mamadov with white and Benidze, Benidze noticed a way to make this happen. He started with the move knight a5. As you can see, this basically forces the trade of the dangerous knight on f3. We should do it in this way. Don't take on e5. We're talking flexibility again. White will take back, and there are additional problems coming up on the d file. So knight a5 first. That's smarter. White played the typical move here. Queen f4, I think, and black hurried before it's too late. They took on f3. Again, don't take on e5. It's, again, very dangerous for us. That would be threats like, for example, bishop takes g6. I think that you can't even take here, right? You can't take because I think white will play this, and yeah, we're getting destroyed. So this should be avoided. Queen f4, he took on f3, and after queen takes f3, please do me a favor and tell me which is black's best move at this point. That's right, we stick to the topic here. We would like to bring about favorable exchanges. What black played here was the clever move bishop g5. Very nice, because if you play first d takes e5, again you have these difficulties with the discoveries. There is bishop takes g6, and there is also, I think, bishop b5 at some occasion. So we should keep that tension still for one more move. Bishop g5, a very nice, simple idea. The point is that without that bishop, white's attack is not really going to be that powerful. They played in the game. No, they didn't take. If they take, by the way, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. No big problem with this. We can pick up the pawn later with the rook, probably, like that. So that's not really a big issue for us. And we would actually become closer and closer to some kind of dream position where white would have the hanging pawns, and we would have a very safe king. So this would be very nice for black to play such hanging pawns. As I think we discussed on some occasion. In the introduction, I think we talked about that. My game, maybe, with Hallmark, the first game that we looked at, we had this kind of structure. Anyway, this would be very nice for black. So in the game, after bishop g5, white played queen h3 instead keeping the Alapin structure, no, taking back on e5 to keep this pressure like that. All right, black took on h6 to not have this dependency. Queen takes, and now they took on e5. I wanted to very quickly mention that it would be a mistake to play queen c7. I have actually done this mistake myself. I had for one period, I remember in my chess career, I had a problem with these positions. My opponents would play this, and I would have big problems in this kind of structures. You can see the point is here that they can take like that, and even ideas like if you play queen takes e3, well, maybe not now, but you will have this at some point. Rook takes f7 and queen takes. Yeah, you could probably play if queen takes. I think you can start with bishop here, maybe. Well, maybe not. I wonder if you could take here. Interesting. Anyway, this would be dangerous in any case for black. I looked at this, it seems. Bishop here, and then put the rook here and bring the other rook or something like that. You have also rook h3 coming, so it's dangerous. So please don't do that. Take on e5 while they can take back with the f-pawn. That's a mistake that I would make many years ago. But here, Benidze, he doesn't make this mistake. D takes, and white took back on e5, I was going to say, but then we play queen c7, and now it's a different story because they didn't manage to open up the f file, right? So it seems that after d takes e5, actually Mamadov played bishop e5 instead. And after rook f8, then he took on e5. Yeah, but I think the benefit of this was simply that if queen c7, he could go back with the queen to e3 and protect both pawns or something like that. But in any case, you can see here black is having a nice game. There is no real attack. You can see that we don't need to be afraid of this, for example, because we could quickly take and bring our queen. Talking about mobilization again, we could quickly bring the queen to defend the king. So very good outcome from black. If we start from the beginning here, this position, crowded board, white has dangerous attacking ideas that we talked about, queen f4 and knight g5, or maybe the pawn h4, h5, but by very precise play, black managed to trade off a few key pieces here in white's attack, starting with knight a5, and later on they'll take there, and they'll play bishop d5, and they have managed to get rid of white's more active minor pieces, and they're leaving them with a bishop which is not that powerful in this structure. Okay, time to move on. Let's talk about the rooks also. I have one example about the trade of rooks. Usually when you trade rooks for defensive purposes, it happens on an open file. Like if these pawns were already traded, we could try to trade off these rooks and help our king or something like that. But there are occasions where we can trade off rooks in a different way, different, you could say, scenarios for this trade. And here we have an occasion in this game between with the white pieces Ohanyan and playing black Mirzoyev. Mirzoyev has to be a little careful because white's attacking, and in the game he was not careful. He played here rook c4. This was a little greedy, this move to take the pawn on d4. White unleashed a very nice combination here. We can do some tactics training if you like. White to play and win. Can you find like the weak spot here? Something will happen. How can white possibly undermine black's defensive position here? Hint that there is a, sacrifice involved. Aha, that's right. White, they broke through here. Pawn takes e6, pawn takes e6, and now, very important move, bishop takes d5. I think the move order is important. Okay, we can talk about that later. E takes d5, that's how the game went. Rook takes, knight takes, and you can see the next move here, of course. Aha, we have like a triple threat, you could say. Exactly, queen f3, that's what Ohanyan played. Threat of mate in 1, the threat of mate in 2, and the threat of queen takes and take on c4 at some occasion. Black couldn't save this game, and white went on to win. You have to carry it out in this way, by the way, doing some tactics training. If you play instead first rook takes f8, this would be bad move order. Black would take with a knight, and then after bishop takes d5, they have the pawn protected, so they could play rook d4. For that reason, rook c4 is a bad idea, but we have to play it in the correct move order. Pawn takes, and bishop takes d5. Very nice little tactical ploy. You can see that in this variation, by the way. Now rook takes d4, since black has not taken back. White wins with bishop takes e6. A nice opportune play by Ohanyan in this game. But black's best option here, of course, you know it, we're in the chapter defensive exchanges, so there can only be one move. Exactly. Rook c1, that's what black should play here. If you trade off one of white's rooks, safe to say, you won't have the same kind of problems on the f-file. I would say almost like philosophically, white managed to put two rooks on the f-file. We can't do the same thing, so safe to say we have to look for some other way of balancing the situation to use our extra rook, so to speak, this rook on c8, and that's what I mean. That's why it's so good to play this move. From white's perspective, please notice that they didn't hurry to play this, because in that case they will lose the advantage that I just talked about, the fact that they have two rooks lined up. In a strictly strategical perspective, please notice that sometimes there are plans like this. I know it won't work here because we have rook c1 and so on, but if you remember, for example, famous game Karpov-Unziker, Karpov put the bishop on a7 and he piled up his pieces, heavy pieces on the a file. That's the kind of thinking I'm referring to here. So that's important to understand. White, they treated the position in a very flexible way. They didn't take on e6. They even keep f6 in the pocket for on some occasion maybe. But okay, in that case maybe the bishop is not so strong. But in any case, they keep the doors open here. They would love black to take, of course, to take back with the pawn, and they would have a very nice pawn center, push e6 and so on. But okay, nothing of this will happen because black has rook c1, as simple as that. Yeah, pawn takes, it does not really give white any big advantage. We can just take back, and yeah, the knight can even like reroute to the king side. Rook takes e1, we can take back, we will take back, I mean, rook f1, and I think the best choice here is just to go back with the queen. Keep the queen, queen g5, we keep the queen on the king side for the sake of safety, although I think black is perfectly fine in either case. Again, this bishop is not the best attacking piece right now. White could play something like queen f3, and we could just go back if we like. It's a tricky position. I'm not completely sure what's going on here, but one thing is clear. We cannot really activate our rook because then they would take. but at the same time, they don't have a threat. So in any case, I think this could be a good move here. Queen d2, target the pawn. And if they want to trade queens, I would actually not trade queens. Maybe this space advantage that they have, it could actually be useful for them in the endgame if they can like bring up the king and so on. So I would keep the queens on instead. I think white is slightly exposed on the king side. So I would play like that. If they play something like f6, they don't really have the right pieces to attack me. So I will probably take back and I will try to bring in my rook. And who knows, maybe I could do the same idea again of trading the rooks. In any case, it's clear that black is perfectly safe here. Good move for black here. Rook c1, trade off white's rook on f1 to release un poco the tension on the f-file, and also you could say that our rook on c8, it didn't have much else to do, so it makes making perfect sense to do that. All right, next example, we will see two examples where we use multiple trades, although we actually saw this here also. But this one is very effective. This example here we have with the white pieces Ortiz and playing black Ganguly. Ortiz is a pawn up, but Ganguly is attacking. So what white did here, they hurried to trade pieces before black gets in and move. Like you can see black's threat here, right? Knight f3, pawn takes, the other knight takes, and that is mate on h2. So white said, all right, let's speed up the defense. First things first, I should trade off that knight so that they can't sack so easily. Knight takes d5, queen takes. Still, I would say there is an issue with knight f3 that we should be careful about, but you already know white's next move. Of course, it's time to look for the trade of queens. The queen was not doing too much anyway, so queen e5. Very clever move, and also we're ready to block, to obstruct black if necessary on the g-file with queen g3. So black didn't want to trade queens, they're a pawn down and they're attacking, so of course they declined. They played bishop f5, white played knight e3. As you can see, knight f3 is not an issue anymore. We could take and then just play queen g3. By the way, we're fortunate that they don't have f2, but that's, yeah, the bishop is in the middle. So yeah, nice calculation by white here. Knight e3, very useful move. We could perhaps take on f5 also at some point if we like, when it will unpin. We usually don't take pin pieces, but okay, you never know. It depends on other factors in the position. Black played rook a8. What to do with the queen? I think queen g3 was a good choice here, but what Ortiz played was also very logical. He played here queen d5, because now he's actually carrying out more trades. King h8, and at this point, maybe knight f3 is actually an issue, so white hurry to take on f5, which means that knight f3 won't work, because again, we could then interpose after taking on f3. So what Ganguly played here was simply knight takes knight, and here I think we had a key moment, because white played like a safety move here, a safety move which makes perfect sense strategically, but it had a tactical defect. They played here the move g3. We understand this perfectly. We don't want them to play g3. We want to fianchetto our bishop. But Ganguly found a very nice move here, a short but effective move to keep the balance. So what do you think? Can you think of any promising attacking move for black? That's correct. He played here the move queen f6. Yeah, sneaky little move what black is about to do here. There are several ideas. One, they are eyeing the rook on a1. Two, they are targeting the pawn on f2. And three, they would like to install a knight on d4, which would again make life slightly unpleasant for white, because there will be ideas like knight f3, or if the bishop is here, maybe knight e2. You can see what I mean. If the king goes that way, maybe, sorry, that way, that would be mating ideas and things like that. So this was a very opportune move by black, and the game was later drawn. But what white could have done here, there was a better move. We go for activity. Aha, if there was a problem with this rook in the previous variation, we can play here, you got it, rook ab1. I think this is, again, it's something about also practical chess. What white didn't like to see here was the move g3, but I can actually live with this. We can take on g3 right now. There are no checking possibilities, really. If they take first, let's say rook takes, in order to take next turn after rook takes e1, queen takes g3, here, I think you can imagine which would be white's next move, all right? You're completely right. This is a good moment, an excellent moment to trade pieces again. Queen e5, and in this way, after queen takes over, yeah, they can maybe move the king also, but it wouldn't make big difference, I think. Rook takes, and white's they have an extra pawn, and also there is not much of an attack for black anymore without queens on the board. So this would be the best way to play, I think. Yeah, knight e3 is not so dangerous. You could maybe play just bishop e2, I think. So that's what happened in this game. White played very well, just some small detail in the end, which prevented them from winning this game. A very good start here was to take on g5 and later on bring in the queen to try to trade the queens as well, or at least mobilize the queen, you could say, to the defense of the king, to put it on g3, for example. So very nice move, knight takes d5, and later on trying to achieve more trades. Similar but slightly more complex example is our next example. We have with the white pieces Gazik, and playing black is Zhou Jianchao. So at this point, you can see white is playing for an attack. That's clear to everyone. So many pieces on the king side. You can see several threats here. One of them would be to play rook h5. Another one might be to play queen h4. They probably don't want to take right now because that would be like a pawn shield for black. So basically they want to invade on the h file, and also you can see that if this knight at some moment leaves the board, there is some trick with bishop e5 also. Black should be extremely careful in this position. There are a few different options. I think that, for example, taking on f5 is not so nice for them. If you take, white will take back, and as you can see, there is pressure on this side also. And again, we have these ideas with queen h4 and even sacrifices coming up. Very dangerous for black. Another thing that we should perhaps not play, it would be very natural to play it, but if you play knight e6, you would say, this knight is not doing anything, I should trade pieces. But there is a tactical issue here. White has this move, queen h4. So if we try to understand this correctly, yeah, white is trying to mate black here, as you can see. If you play something like h6, I think what happens is knight takes h6, pawn takes, and bishop e5. I think this is what happens, right? Wow, tricky position, but I think there is something going on here, and black can't really, they can't really avoid this, I think. So very dangerous situation for black. They could try a move like bishop g8, I think, but still it would be dangerous. Knight h6, yeah, okay, this is not something you can easily see, but that's the fantastic move that white would play. And I think there is the threat of knight. No, that's not correct. No, they check with knight. Threat of knight takes g8, I think, and queen takes. And if you take on h6, as you can see, we have nice tactic here. I was going to say, wow, I don't even see the tactic. What's going on here? Did I get my variations wrong? G takes x7. That's hard to understand. I think I understand it, yeah. Probably you also understand it, yeah, exactly. If you take with the bishop, there is rook g8 check, right? And we pick up the queen, something like that. And if you take on g5 instead, there is mate, right? Mate in two moves. We can trade here, I mean, we can promote, sorry, and then we mate them on h7. Yeah, very, very tricky variations, I admit that, but it shows something about white's potential here. They have so many pieces in the attack, so it's not surprising that a few variations here will work in their favor tactically. So what Zhou Jianchao played here, very nice move, very effective. He traded off pieces. How did he manage that? By this very nice move, bishop d6. This is really a nice example. It's a good takeaway about this topic, bishop d6, in the first place, because he's challenging, I think, one typical, what can you say, mental obstacle that us chess players have, in the sense that we don't like to let our opponents take our bishops with our knights. At least that's my impression after many years in this sport, that we like the opposite, that they take our knights with our bishops, but not so much that they take our bishops with their knights for some reason, because supposedly these two pieces have the same value, right? Anyway, maybe you don't agree with me on this, but that's the impression that I have so far. And Zhou, he definitely saw this idea, and he didn't care about the bishop being traded for the knight, because he understood that actually both these two pieces are very important in white's white's attacking task. So let's see if we understand this. They cannot take with the bishop, because then we take the knight, right? Sorry, the rook we take. Sorry, we take the rook. Yes, so many pieces here, so I'm getting a little confused. So they cannot take here. Yeah, we take the rook. If they take on d6, that's what happened in the game. We take back. As you can see, we're relying on this pin along the f-file, and also we're happy now that we can bring our knight a little closer, something like knight e4 or knight f5 perhaps. We're able to bring more pieces to the king side. I feel like we're not outnumbered anymore. As for the moves, queen h4, yeah, as you can see, this won't work anymore. It's much more effectful to have the bishop here, because now we can simply take, and we distract our queen from from the attack. So that's an important part also of the story, that when you play bishop d6, it's like you put more pressure on white because you have these threats immediately of bishop takes or perhaps even queen takes if they're not careful. So bishop d6, very strong move. He understood this concept perfectly, that we need to trade off pieces and we have to do it in this order so that we challenge white's attack immediately. Knight takes d6, knight takes d6, and I think here white played a move queen g3. Yeah, they unpinned and they were hoping probably to play bishop e5, but here Zhou Jianchao played knight f5, very clever move, so that bishop e5 is not possible anymore. And after what happened in the game, yeah, if you take, we can just take back, and you can see that even black gets some attacking possibilities now. So I think white moved the queen somewhere. What did they play in the game? Queen g4. Wow, this is really complex example. Knight e3, that's what black played. Queen h4, you can see again, white, they don't give up the plan of mating, no? But h6, black was very safe here. It's nice to have this knight in the middle. You get some additional tactical possibilities. So I think white is like in a dead-end street here. They actually played rook h5 to trade off queens. They wanted to trade off queens, and black, I think maybe black simply had, did they have king g8 coming up? Well, actually that would not be a threat because there is mate, but it's also hard for white to progress here, so maybe rook f8 would be the threat here, possibly. Anyway, in the game they played queen rook h5, and black took on h4, rook takes, and bishop f5. And finally it was actually black who was playing for a win here, but I think it was a draw in the end, this game. Anyway, what white could have done instead after knight takes d6 was queen h4 straight away, threatening mate, but okay, we will just play h6. Again, you can see if bishop takes, we're taking on g5, so that doesn't really work. Rook h5. I feel like we just saw this, but I think it's the different variation. Yeah, in our variation, black's knight was already, in the game I mean, the knight was on e3 already. Here it's not that favorable, the version for black, but it's still good enough for us. Queen takes, we're happy to trade off queens, of course, before there is an accident coming up on h6. And after rook takes h4, as you can see, without queens on the board, that's how we started this chapter. With queens or without queens, that's a big difference. And that's why this idea of defensive exchanges is so powerful, because you can quickly alter the strategical balance in the position by quickly trading the queens. It's one of the most effective tools within defensive play. Black played here knight e4 in our variation, and this means that white is having a slight problem with the rook. They don't want to take like that, giving black a passed pawn, so they could take on a6 instead. Yeah, bishop e5, it can be countered if you want to play something like this, even if even that is not that dangerous. But okay, why allow it if we can just play king g8? And you can see that if they take, we will have tactical chances also with black counterplay. So all right, let's focus here after knight e4 on white's most critical move. Bishop takes h6, creating a passed pawn on the b file. We can play again this move, bishop f5. We get ready to take this pawn, and we open up the e file for the rook. It's true that white has this looming passed pawn, but also we have some counter chances. Like we can put the knight somewhere, which would be the best square for the knight. Knight c3 perhaps, and we could get some counterplay. If they go b5, maybe we have rook e2 now that the bishop is not there anymore. So safe to say, black has some chances here also. Maybe even you could play like bishop c8 to trade off the bishop at some occasion. But okay, first things first, we can first look at more active operations, and also you can also see that the rook on h4 is very badly placed. So yeah, these are small details, but the big picture here is that white was playing for an attack. They had many threats in this position, the moves rook h5, queen h4, and so on. Black found a perfect antidote here. They traded off pieces here by playing bishop d6. Not perhaps very natural, this move, but highly effectful. White does not win a piece here for multiple reasons. One is the pin, another is the fact that the rook is also a little shaky on f4. Nice thing about this move is that you automatically trade off at least one of their attacking pieces on f5 and f4. So very nice little move, bishop d6, which helped black to keep the balance here in this game. Yeah, by the way, if they take on b5, you can take simply, I think, on f4. Yeah, exactly. Then you can take back. So this is not so dangerous either. So nice move, bishop d6. Very opportune move. There was only one chance for this move, I think, in this game. Our last example is like about the opposite side of the story. We saw one example where black shouldn't, the defender shouldn't trade queens because it actually helped white. If you remember that example where who was playing in that example? It was Tabatabai with white and Yufa with black, where Yufa traded queens on f7, if you remember, and he ended up in a difficult rook endgame. So sometimes the defender should not trade off the queens. And also, we could say it's not the opposite, but it's somehow related to avoiding trades. If you're attacking, you should, of course, not let your opponent trade off your attacking pieces. And that's what our last example is about. In this game with the white pieces, Grigorian, Spartak, and black is Ellen Nielsen. You can see that black has just played here. Well, you cannot see it, but I can tell you, black has just played bishop c4, trying to trade off the bishops. This is a very important attacking bishop, as you can see in this IQP structure, where, by the way, white is not happy to trade pieces too much. They want to attack. So I think white's next move here is not difficult. It's good on general grounds also, but particularly here it's very good because it keeps the light square bishop. So how do you think Grigorian managed to keep the light square bishop on the board? That's right. I'm not referring to some sacrifice on c4. That's not needed right now. Very simple move here, rook fe1, activating the last piece and getting ready to store the bishop on b1. That's what happened in the game. Queen c7, and now simply bishop b1. As simple as that. Now you can see we keep our strong bishop. We're ready to mount a battery on this same diagonal, and at the same time black's bishop on c4. It's a little like, you could say, living in its own world. It's not that useful right now. So black played bishop d5, trying to improve that bishop. We played our move here, queen c2, provocation in the attack, you could say. No matter how black reacts here, they end up with weaknesses. Probably f5 was the least of evils. Yeah, f5 weakening some squares, but also making it a bit more difficult for white to attack. In the game, Nielsen played g6, and this made it very tempting for white to try to soften up those pawns, and that's exactly what they did in the game. h4, you can see h5 is coming, trying to open up this diagonal. If black plays h5, you don't think twice about taking it, right? So in the game they played instead knight b5, but it's very difficult now to save black. Their pieces are not very effective, and you can see that also they're far away from the main battlefield. I mean the king side. Queen d2, clever move, targeting, the pawn on h6, black played king g7, and there are many ways to play here. h5 was very tempting, I must say, because if g5 you could then perhaps introduce the knight into the attack as well. But in the game, white played a little on the queen side. They played a4. They knew that black's pieces were not well placed. Knight a3 does not make a good impression. White played bishop a2. We were saying, but hey, we were not supposed to keep those bishops, but here the point is simply tactical, that white's about to win material. They're about to trap this knight, which is why they play here bishop a2. So if bishop takes, yeah, you can see for yourself, bishop takes, queen takes, and the knight is short of a good destiny. If it goes here, we will of course just take it. So knight c4, queen c2, threat of a5 coming up. Black played knight a3 and queen b2. As you can see, it's funny, but we're actually also adding some extra possibilities in our position. If black's bishop leaves, we will play d5. So knight c4, it came back, and now white noticed that they can actually use this idea straight away. Bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, because after bishop takes, what do you think white played? I don't need to ask you twice, of course, d5. Now we have a fantastic attack coming up. We have all the pieces ready to attack, which cannot be said by black's pieces. This bishop is mainly a tactical weakness, you could say, undefended bishop. King h7, white could play in different ways. Knight g4, perhaps the most obvious one. The knight is getting ready to enter on f6. The rest is not very difficult. h5, knight f6, check. King h6, queen c1, so that we can pick up the bishop next turn. King g7, queen takes c4, and white won. You can see that, yeah, if you take this knight, you probably get killed here. Queen, some mate somewhere, right? Queen c3 maybe, and if king f5, queen f3, almost mate. I know I'm very close to mating here. We can check this. Yeah, king. I was thinking I could give check. Okay, this is of course simpler, no? And if you go here, I can. Sorry. Mental blackout here. Sorry, queen takes e5, of course. So if king f5, I was just thinking, where is the mate? Yeah, you can probably see this faster than I can. But there should be a mate here, right? You cannot expect to live for long with that king. Yeah, if I had to play this in the bullet game, I would probably just play rook e3 and put the rook on f3. But maybe there is something smarter. There should be something smarter. Yeah, Stockfish would tell you what to play here. I'm too slow to see this, but I would like to solve this challenge. Let's see, queen check, king f5. If I go queen f3, I force them to play queen f4. this is not too beneficial for me. I could even win the game with this funny tactic, right? King takes and knight e3. But there should be a better way of winning. Yeah, I'm struggling to see this, but there should be many ways. You know what? Maybe you could play something like this also. That looks like a very nice tactic, no? Because you have this coming up, and if they take, now I think you're neatly mating them here. Yeah, something like that. Okay, there should be a billion ways to mate here, so I'm sorry, I was just a little intrigued by this situation. How would we actually mate them? But okay, never mind. Let's go back to business here. What we're doing, we are winning at this point in the game. But what we were doing in the very beginning was that we managed to keep the bishop, the attacking bishop. And this was very simple here. Rook fe1, we're unpinning the bishop so that after black's next move with queen c7, they need to protect this pawn, I think, because there was some tactic with knight takes b7 and bishop takes e4. And here we will play bishop b1. So we managed to unpin the bishop, which means that our bishop will stay on the board, and indirectly it will help our attack. We have a bishop participating in the attack. They don't have a bishop participating in the defense, I would say. So very nice, simple move, rook e1, because we're interested in keeping the bishop. So that's what I wanted to say about this topic of avoiding defensive exchanges. In this case, the attacker's side we're looking at here, right? We want to avoid black's defensive exchange of bishops. We don't want to play this, because if bishop takes, they will take back, and they will have a chance to later on put the knight on d5 perhaps. This is what we would like to avoid. We achieve that by means of rook fe1. All right, these were the examples that I wanted to show you in the context of defensive exchanges. We saw a wide range of cases here. We started with this example. We had queen d5. That was really survival tactics. Without trading queens, we were getting killed here due to rook d1 coming up. In the next example, we saw that white had more choices, but still queen c2, that would have been the safest choice, saving the king, avoiding black's attack against the f2 square in the game. We saw in Tabatabay Yufa that black should actually not trade queens. Queen f7 was a bad idea because white was better in the endgame. It was better to keep the queens on and go for a counterattack. So this is like the exception to the rule, that the side which is defending, not always they should look for the trade of queens. The next example about trading minor pieces, bishop c8, very clever move, preparing knight c5 to trade off white's most prominent attacking piece, the light squared bishop. We saw in Tukhayev's game that Van Velen found this move knight e4, ignoring the sacrifice and getting ready to trade off the very important knight on f3, after which white couldn't use this mating idea with knight e5 and queen h4, queen h7, and so on. We saw in the next example, Puranik hurried to take on b6 so that he avoided knight c4. No hard feelings about losing the so-called good bishop on e3. It was about dynamics here, attacking play. Don't let them get a knight to c4. Trade it off and then go for our own attack with f4 and so on. We saw in this Alapin battle that black could trade off the pieces. Knight a5 was very powerful to trade off first the knight on f3, then trade off the bishop on h6 by means of bishop g5, which meant that in the end white ended up with the least active minor piece, the bishop on d3. We saw that Mirzoev could have traded off white's attacking rook, and this would mean an end to white's attacking aspirations. Any tricks with f takes e6 and bishop takes d5, and so as occurred in the game. We saw Ortiz hurry to trade off knights and then bring in the queen to also trade off the queens and fight against the black plan of knight f3 check. And then we saw this, I would say, perhaps the most complex example, bishop d6, not so intuitive, rather counterintuitive. This move bishop d6 was very powerful because he immediately assured a few trades in this position, which made his defensive task a bit simpler. And finally, we saw the opposite situation where we are the attacking side and we don't accept trades. We avoid opponents' defensive exchanges. All right, thanks, and see you in the next chapter.